Despite their population of a mere 2 million Mongols in the 12th century, they subsequently ruled over a population of more than 100 million people by conquering most of the Middle East, Russia, and China, a total of 16% of the Earth's surface. This Mongol supremacy was established by a small tribe chief, Temujin, who united the steppe nomads, gave them a mission to defeat armies much more powerful and populous than his own. Who was this guy Temujin? How did he change the history of our modern world? And how did his ginormous empire collapse? Let's find out with us, together, in Intrigued Mind. In the 11th century AD, the Mongols were one of the dozens of nomadic tribes that lived a harsh life in the cold, inhospitable grasslands in the Eurasian steppe. They were forged by hardship, and they were constantly fighting and stealing from the other tribes. It was a tough life. But it was about to change with one Mongol, Temujin Boregin, better known as Genghis Khan, who would rise to power to unite all the tribes and then unleash the Mongol fury upon the world. Born around the 1160s in a Boregin clan of northern Mongolia, Temujin had a very rough childhood. He was 9 when his father, Yasuke, was poisoned by his Tatar enemies. The future Genghis Khan was too young to become a clan chief, so his family was forced into exile. They were doomed to a life of poverty and wandering. Temujin was captured and enslaved to prevent him from taking revenge for his father's killing, but he survived everything. At the age of 16, Temujin married a girl called Borde, who was soon kidnapped by a rival tribe, the Merkits, as revenge, because Temujin's father had kidnapped Temujin's mother from the very same tribe. Temujin was a nobody, but he was not going to stay silent. He enlisted help for a daring rescue mission and successfully brought Borde home. This gave Temujin the confidence of a young warrior, and he soon embarked on a quest to unite all the other tribes. Each time a rival tribe was defeated, their leaders were executed, and the remaining men incorporated into his own tribe. By 1205, Temujin became the undisputed master of the Mongol steppes. In the following year, a Kurultai, an assembly of representatives from the various tribes, was called, and the title of Genghis Khan, the universal leader, was conferred on Temujin. Having united all the tribes, Genghis Khan abolished inherited aristocratic titles. He focused on meritocracy by putting competent leaders and allies rather than relatives in key positions. He reformed laws such as forbidding selling and kidnapping of women, banning Mongol enslavement, adopting a writing system, granting diplomatic immunity to foreign ambassadors, conducting a regular census, and allowing the freedom of trade and freedom of religion well before that idea caught on elsewhere. This was the beginning of the Great Mongol Era. After becoming the Great Khan of the United Mongols, Genghis Khan's first target was the Xixia, a kingdom in western China. This campaign began in 1207 and was concluded 2 years later, when its ruler submitted to the Great Khan. The Mongols then set their sights on the Qing dynasty of northern China. This campaign began in 1211 and lasted over 20 years, resulting in the destruction of the Qing dynasty. Then came a defining moment in their history, when Mongol ambassadors and merchants were killed by the neighboring Khwarezmian Empire in 1219. The subsequent Mongol revenge completely wrecked and ended the golden age of Islam. Genghis Khan swept through one city after another, including Bukhara, Samarkand, and Urgench, ending in its annihilation in 1221. Only skilled workers such as blacksmiths, carpenters, and jewelers were saved, while aristocrats and soldiers were killed. As one Russian historian notes, the Mongol attack left no eyes open to weep for the dead. They came, they swept, they plundered, they slaughtered, and they departed. In many ways, it was an utter disaster for a civilized society. These types of attacks were infamously known as the Mongol catastrophe. After the fall of the Khwarezmian Empire, the Mongols had gained a reputation for fully destroying its enemies. Their campaigns spread terror and panic that sparked mass migrations of displaced and petrified people. Nevertheless, these conquests brought some benefit as well. For instance, trade between the East and the West was re-established through the historic Silk Road, and Mongols launched a reliable postal service and the use of paper money. Peace and protection was established under his hegemony. By the time of Genghis Khan's death in 1227, the Mongol Empire stretched from the Sea of Japan in the east to the Caspian Sea in the west. Yet on his deathbed, he said two things. Number one, with heaven's aid, I have conquered for you a huge empire. But my life was too short to achieve the conquest of the world. That task is left for you. Number two, bury me in secret. His burial site has been a perplexing question to modern scholars since then. Many assume that Genghis Khan was buried at his birthplace near the Onon River. According to legend, about 2,000 people who attended to his funeral needs were killed by his army. This army was then killed by his escort, and the escort killed anyone and anything that crossed their path, and later committed suicide. Thus, everyone who knew about the location was dead. Folklore says that when the emperor was finally laid to rest with 40 virgins, 40 horses, and a huge treasure that he gathered from his conquests, a river was diverted over his grave to make it impossible to find. This is why in the last 800 years since the Great Khan's death, no one has found his tomb. After the death of Genghis Khan, Ogode, his third son, was proclaimed the second Khagan, meaning Great Khan, of the Mongol Empire in 1229. During Ogode's reign, the Mongols finally destroyed the Jing dynasty and began their war against the southern Song. He established Karakorum as the capital of the Mongol Empire. It was also during his time that the Mongols launched their first campaigns against Korea. To the west, the Mongols established permanent control of Persia. In 1240, Kiev was sacked by the Mongols, marking the end of the Russian resistance. The Mongols continued their advance into Europe with the invasion of Central Europe and were intent on conquering the rest of the continent, all the way to the Atlantic. They remained the terror of Eastern Europe for the rest of the century. Yet the Genghis Khan's empire has since crumbled. Many historians are still trying to piece the puzzle of what actually caused the fall of Mongols. One noted historian, David Morgan, thinks that many historians still take for granted the idea of a gradual decline, first promulgated by Edward Gibbon. Empires may not fall until they have previously undergone a process of decline. Let's discuss if this was true for the Mongol Empire and what caused their fall in our second and conclusive chapter of this series. Stay tuned with an intrigued mind.